This episode is sponsored by Rosina Meatballs. Rosina Meatballs come in 6 varieties, including its traditional Italian style, home style, Swedish, turkey, Angus beef, and gluten free. Go to rosina.com and get some meatballs while you listen to this episode.
The Anthony Rogers Show. The best show in the universe.
Welcome back to the greatest show in the universe. Today we have guest Kenneth Womack. He is a writer of several Beatles books that got my attention. John Lennon 1980, The Last Days in Life of, and then Maximum Volume about George Martin, which is awesome. And then just it goes on, and you could Google him, Google his name, so you have more stuff. Links in the description as well. How are you, Kenneth? Sorry for that long.
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be on the greatest show.
Well, it's the guests that make it the greatest show, man. What got you into the Beatles originally? You have a lot of Beatles books.
Well, my Beatles origin story is pretty sad. It's it goes back to the late 1970s when the Beatles cartoons came on TV one morning as I'm probably eating my Cheerios, right? And the cartoons, of course, were not great, but the songs were wonderful. And I've been essentially on a quest since that day to try to understand them. And of course, there's a universe, a great Beatles universe out there when it comes to trying to comprehend their story, and I am still in it.
What do you think? Do you think Paul McCartney died? Are you one of those guys?
I am not one of those guys. No, and yeah, I did write a story about that for my junior high newspaper, the Kingwood Cougar. You probably heard about it.
Well, I'm a big fan of the Kingwood Cougar, actually.
Yeah, well, no, they're. I hope they're still in print. I'm kind of been curious about that, but in any event, I did write a story about that. But no, that story, the idea of the Paul is dead phenomenon, really occurs outside of their narrative. So I don't really venture there very much, but it is interesting that at the one moment when the Beatles are going into their disbandment and Paul McCartney is hiding out in Scotland, that story breaks. I do enjoy that irony.
Yeah, it's a great. I love the story. Yeah, no, I legit love that story. What got you into some of the? I guess in particular, what made you write a book on John Lennon, in his last days and stuff, or like 1980 in particular? What made you? What intrigued you, I guess, enough to write that? That's a great subject, really.
Well, I discovered the Beatles, which inevitably, one would do. But I discovered them in 1977, went head over heels about the Beatles and their solo years. And, that was Double Fantasy was the album that came out very early on in my consciousness about the Beatles. And I was excited by it. I'd seen the advance articles in Rolling Stone and all of the buzz. And, 3 weeks later, John Lennon is dead. And I think I've been trying to come to grips, like so many people, every day since then. And, the closer you look at that wonderful story, though, you begin to notice that with the exception of how badly, obviously, it ends that year, the guy was enjoying an incredible artistic renaissance, really until the last hours of his life. And I wanted to bring that part of his story into narrative form and not the assassination, which tends to overshadow his last year. So I wanted an alternative to the true crime books that inevitably are created when it comes to the events of December 8th, 1980.
That was a unique take. That's what made me ask that originally. That. I think that a lot of people have that nostalgia for the Beatles. They found them young and they just kind of I don't know, worked on them. So you read a lot of stuff though. I mean, you've been writing books for how long? How many years? 2006, I guess, or longer.
My first book was published. It was an academic book in 1996, I believe.
Wow.
And I have a number of academic titles that are out there. I suppose I have a kind of bibliomania when it comes to writing, but there is something absolutely seductive about being in that world where, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, you exist in another place. And it's not because my life in my real life is not good. It's wonderful, and I have a wonderful family. But rather, it's just intoxicating to be able to go into a place, whether it's 1980 or 1966 or a completely manufactured fictive universe, and spend some time there.
No, I like that aspect of
Yeah,
it.
it's absolutely addicting.
You sound like a fiction
Addictive.
writer. Like you sound like a fiction writer, but like you're writing a lot of nonfiction, which is interesting. Like I feel like how you describe that would be like how like a great fiction writer would almost.
Sure. And, in fact, I'm teaching a nonfiction course this semester here at Monmouth University. And one of the things we talk about a lot is the idea of creative nonfiction, where you take historical facts, but you bring them to life in such a way that, you're creating a page turner, right? You're creating a book that draws the reader in, has moments of suspense, where sometimes the outcomes may seem uncertain. And I think those are the kind of books we all want to read, right? Whether it's fiction or nonfiction, we want to read the ones that grip us. So
Yeah.
you bet. I try to bring the stories to life in that way.
It seems like that, no, for sure. Who's your favorite Beatle?
I don't have one.
Is
You need them all.
Four-way time.
Every Beatle is essential. George
Even
Martin's
Ringo?
essential. Brian Epstein. I want everything. Today I was asked, Beatles or Rolling Stones. I need all of them. Are you kidding?
That's a great question. Yeah.
I don't want to make those kind of distinctions. I want it all.
Yeah. My mom always tries to argue with me about the Rolling Stones being better than the Beatles, and like I'm a big Beatles fan too. And like she always just like thinks she like hates the Beatles or something. It's like, oh, I don't know. I won't.
Yeah, why does it have to be an either or situation? That one of the best things that happens to the Rolling Stones is the Beatles sort of move off the page a little bit in 1969, and that gives them some breathing room during their greatest period, right? Roughly from Beggar's Banquet and Let It Bleed into Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street. That's an incredible period of artistry for them, and it's helpful that the Beatles have sort of gone into, permanent hibernation.
Yeah, I know it's crazy. So you wrote books on George Martin as well. Like, were you drawn to him as well in the like more or less?
Well, yeah, my quest is to try to understand the art. At the end of the day, that's what I'm interested in, whether I'm talking about John Lennon or George Martin or the Beatles. And to understand the Beatles' art, ground zero is June 6, 1962, when they have the good fortune of walking into Studio 2, and there's George Martin. A man they didn't know other than by reputation of the comedy records he had produced. And, trying to understand how they go from Love Me Do on that day through Abbey Road and the last days, at least as a recording unit in August 1969. You got to understand George Martin. He's essential to that tale. How was he able to maneuver inside of the power structure of that band? What is our debt to him? And I believe it's considerable. That the second luckiest day after the day when Brian Epstein hitched his wagon to their star, their second luckiest day was failing the Decca audition in January 1962 and being available to be in George's tutelage. It's a marriage made in heaven. They didn't need a techie producer like the guy they may have landed in Mike Smith at Decca. They needed George Martin, who was, creative and interested in, as he used to put it, using the recording studio as a kind of magic workshop.
Yeah. What do you think makes the Beatles so magic? Like that, I think they are, man. Like they were one of the first. I guess like Elvis was like the first to blow up, I guess. But I mean, they're like one of the first. I don't know. What do you think makes them magic? It's like a weird thing.
They're a miracle. And that I was speaking to the great guitarist Steve Van Zandt today, and that's what he said. They were a miracle, and I think he's right. They're absolutely a miracle. They shouldn't exist. Coming from Liverpool in 1962 into the world, the recording artistry world, and certainly coming to the United States in 1964, it kind of defies logic and expectation that they could take this fusion amongst the four of them and create what they do in those masterworks, Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, the White Album, Abbey Road. It's just absolutely remarkable. Now, the miracle part aside, one of the best aspects of it, though, that I love to talk about with our students here, is the fact that when this happens, this wonderful fusion, it is also because they were very ambitious. They didn't quit, right? There were a lot of years and opportunities for them to break up between 1957 and 1962, where everybody else in their circle had essentially gone by the wayside because real life steps in, people get married, people get jobs, etc. They had stayed together, but they also were extraordinarily hardworking. They didn't take many days off until later. They would work 14 hours. When they had an idea, they would see it through to perfection. Great example of that is Help. The song Help, and it has that wonderful descending lead guitar line that George Harrison plays. He couldn't play it the first time through, but a lot of bands would have said, well, who cares, we'll ditch it. Nope. They recorded until George Harrison had that line down cold. And it's an essential part of the song. It's one of the great moments of complexity inside that song, but it just exemplifies how hard they worked. They had all the talent, but when you add in hard work and that kind of steadfastness, that's when I guess those kind of miracles happen.
It's rare. I like a band like that. It was like four Elvises. It was like it's weird, man. Like just seeing how like music. I mean, I guess it made sense. The music really made money back. They were one of the first bands to really make money with it. They were one of the first arena ones too. I think. I mean, I think the Doors did the arena tours first, but the Beatles were the first to kind of like do the arena thing. I think like on a bigger level than Elvis, And
sure. They changed the industry in the sense that they rewrote it so that they could become a studio band. Prior to that, bands only made their money on the road, right? They got a pittance in royalties, and that was essentially how the record labels made their money. But the Beatles upended that. But of course, they could do that because they had sheer economic power.
Yeah. And like the Hamburg, Germany story is interesting. You brought up like how they earned it, man. They literally worked for it. Like they were sleeping in like a closet or something, weren't they? Like it was like a small room, like they're all sleeping in, like working in like Hamburg, Germany for like the Malcolm Gladwell perception, like getting your 10,000 hours came from that originally, like the Beatles.
Yeah, I've heard Gladwell get criticized lately, but that 10,000 hour rule is a very powerful yardstick for thinking about what they did in those 5 residencies by playing 6 days a week. 6 nights a week, 7 days a week, rather. What a remarkable output that they had. Talk about an apprenticeship where they all learned how to play in their own fashion. It's vital to that story. A lot of people have desires to be a novelist or a musician or I don't know, a football player, you name it. But there's another aspect to actually putting in those hours.
No, definitely. I see that a lot of my generation too. I saw a lot of people that are really talented, didn't stick with it kind of thing. And then the people that outwork everybody are the people that do it. It's like, and I feel like the Beatles were no different. You had 4 guys that outworked everybody. I mean, basically. So they got better, and like their song, and the fact that they're only around for like such a short time is weird to me too. Like that's such a powerful band, big legacy, inspired so many bands. It was barely around a decade, a little over, but it's just. I guess if you count 57, they're only popular for a short amount of time, rather. You know what I mean?
Sure. Well, they only made records for just short of 7 years.
Right. That's more or less what the focal point of the Beatles is. I feel like for myself is those 7 years, and that's just like that's insane. Like that's insane.
Absolutely. And, I've said many times before, and I believe this, that the greatest move they ever make is walking off the stage forever in 1969. They created an unparalleled mystique that exists around their reputation and their achievement. This is a band that did what they were going to do. And left before they tarnished their reputation, before they maybe poorly served their music by getting back together. You can imagine. I wish John Lennon had lived, of course, but I imagine if he had, they would have gotten back together. Everybody did. The money was too big. I mean, by that point, they were getting close to being offered $1 billion. They wouldn't have been able to turn that down, I don't think, especially if they could give it to a charitable organization, right? I mean, that was their entire their entire brand is peace and love and progressive politics. So they couldn't have passed up on that. But you know, for them to get back together during the disco era, or perhaps worse yet, during the sort of plastic, synthetic, synthesized 80s, I think they might very well have tarnished their sound doing that. But of course, the mystique of it all is that we'll never know.
Yeah, it was weird seeing him break up into like Wings and like solo projects of Paul McCartney and like solo projects of John Lennon and George Harrison playing solo projects and also on their projects. He was smart enough to play both sides. Like, but it was just like, it was just interesting. The music that came out of it solo. Even, I mean, we wouldn't have the Traveling Wilburys. We wouldn't have like, I mean, at least that guitar in it. You know, it's like, it's just like kind of crazy seeing how they all went their own way after that. Like, and it's such a magic time. I mean, people will still listen to Paul McCartney talk. I mean, then it hasn't been in a band since like 1970, or was it 71 or 70? I'm blanking on that. Like, when they broke up.
They broke up. Well, in in September 1969. They
69.
were
Okay.
Done.
Okay.
Said as much. You know. And imagining that we couldn't have pun intended, that we wouldn't have all of those wonderful solo records, right? I mean, I believe the number is they had 20 #1 solo hits.
That's insane to even think about.
I mean,
they're still writing hits afterwards, and like you hear that a lot in the solo project. Like you can hear like I feel like John Lennon needed more of a band to fill in, but I mean Double Fantasy is still a great album, but I feel like he needed more of a band feel than like Paul McCartney did. Paul McCartney had like Linda McCartney and like a couple session musicians, and he had a full sound. But I think John Lennon had kind of like a fraction of his sound, but his words were great, and his songs were so powerful it didn't matter that he was just playing piano basically because he was so powerful.
Well, yeah, but he did have a band he liked very much for that record. You know, the Earl Slick and Hugh McCracken, and you know, they were a crack unit that were very well selected by Jack Douglas for that project. And in fact, Douglas also did something brilliant in that he took John's demos and had hired an arranger, so that by the time the band got in the studio with John, they knew all the licks and the songs very, very well.
Yeah, I just felt like the way it felt though is like it felt like 1/4 of the Beatles. You know,
well, it probably is, right?
Yeah, it literally was. It literally was, but it was still a great sound. Not to knock it, but I felt like the Beatles together were better than they were solo. But
I totally agree with you. I think they were always the sum of their parts.
Yeah.
And you know, when you look at their careers, much of the best material is released in their earliest parts of their solo career.
Ha. That's funny. You're right.
Now that's natural anyway, given, you know, laws of diminishing returns. But the closer they were to being a working unit, I argue, and I think the numbers prove this, that was their really their best work. And the same was true, by the way, for George Martin when you look at his post-Beatles production work. But of course, he never had a client again that was like John, Paul, George, and Ringo.
Wait. Yeah, Martin died like in '66, didn't he? He died pretty young.
No, he died in 2016. In fact, a couple of weeks will be the anniversary, March 8th, 2016. You may be thinking about Brian Epstein, who died in August 1967 at 32.
Maybe maybe I mixed him up because I thought, that makes more sense. Okay, so I was like, I thought they died so young. Yeah, but I remember him dying after.
Yeah, Brian doesn't see the end of the Beatles story.
Yeah, that's crazy. Like, who was that drummer that was like a Pete Best or something? Who was the drummer that before Ringo that like just like they had somebody, didn't they? And right before they blew
Pete
up.
Best, of course. Yeah, Pete is.
Thought that was.
He's still alive and with us in Liverpool.
I mixed up Pete Best and Chad Channing from Nirvana. Like they both have the same story. They're like a drummer. Then all of a sudden the band blows up and they're just like, oh fuck. Like that's how I feel. It's like
Pete would probably enjoy that story in an ironically interesting way.
Yeah. Do you know him?
I've not met Pete.
That sounds like you knew. Okay, yeah, it just sounded like you did.
Yeah, no, I don't know Pete, but I know, obviously I've studied him a lot.
No doubt, yeah. That's awesome. What did you think of that movie where that guy woke up and everybody didn't know of no one heard of the Beatles before, then started playing? I forgot what it's called right now, but do you remember that?
It's called Yesterday. And,
Yesterday, that's it.
I love the concept. I think it's a fascinating concept. You know, but as a movie, I was severely disappointed or sorely disappointed because the characters, the romantic leads, didn't seem like they were in love to me. And so if the love story doesn't feel convincing enough, I have trouble, because that's what they're selling me, right? Is this idea
Right.
that these two will have chemistry. I had trouble connecting with it in that way. I felt like it probably needed a rewrite. The idea is wonderful. And of course, you've seen it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and the logic of having, if there's a world with no Beatles, then John Lennon's alive, and they play out that logic, and you see him at the end.
That was
I think
kind of
that was
crazy.
really touching.
That
But
was
I think that if they'd really secured other parts of the story, I probably would have been in a puddle in the
yeah.
theater, of my own tears. but I do like that idea, if you work out the internal logic of the film.
That is crazy. Paul McCartney was saying on like on some TV show that he saw it. He said he saw it in the back of the theater, and they're like, Paul McCartney was the greatest songwriter of all time. He's like just giggling in the back about it. I think it was on Colbert or something. I forgot, some show like that. It was like talking about Paul McCartney singing it in the theater. Also, I thought that was interesting. The Beatles had a good thing, like you said. You found them on the cartoon. I think everybody had their own kind of experience finding the Beatles, and I think that and as they go on through generations now, it's kind of crazy.
What's yours?
I see. I don't know actually. I don't actually know mine actually. But because it's not like my favorite band, but they're up there. You know what I mean? Like I think they're. I can't even remember the first time I heard the Beatles right off. I can't name it. But I feel like everybody else has that. Like they found them like in some way. Like it's almost like that JFK thing, like where we were JFK got shot or something. Like so, older people always know like oh, I saw him here, I saw him here, I saw him on Ed Sullivan, like I saw him on here, the huge ones,
In my case, I think I became cognizant about them, but they were always there.
Yeah.
And we're all on our own quest to find great music, and fortunately, they're one of the choices we have. And I'm delighted that at one time I lived when all of the Beatles were walking the earth, right? I'm excited by that, and it means a lot to me. But I'm always on the quest for new music. I would love to see the band or the artists who come along and unseat the Beatles, or at least have a worthy comparison to them. A number of artists, of course, have had, cadres of hit singles or a litany of albums, but no one has quite created the level and high quality of their output. I want that because I'm always searching for new music. I feel lucky and thrilled that I have them in my collection. I want more, and I hope we do see something like that.
I almost feel like a lot of it was stifled in the '90s because I think like the same way when the Beatles blew up, like Elvis tried to keep them out of America. I felt like the Rolling Stones did that to the Verve Pipe out of Britain at the time. Like they had that Bittersweet Symphony song, and like they sampled a Stones song, and then Stones are just like they jumped on any excuse they could to trample them,
And that's a heartbreaking story, because it just killed the Verve. The Verve. I just called them the Verve.
I called them. I said Verve
it really
Pipe,
did destroy them. I was did a book signing once with another fellow who was their guitarist.
Oh, wow.
And he told me a number of their stories, and it really breaks your heart because I really felt like they were about to go places.
Same. The only band I could even think of like that Britain produced since then, at least Britain exclusive, I'd say like Gorillaz and Blur, kind of like similar kind of vibe. Like they never really blew up like the Beatles. They only, like in America, they only had that one song, really, that song 2, or like with the Gorillaz, they had maybe like 3 songs, but they had the potential though.
The Blur, Blur is wonderful. That was a band that I happened upon because I was with my future son-in-law. We were in his car one day, and they were on his Spotify playlist. And the next thing you know, I'm just imbibing them. They have a number of really terrific songs.
They never popped
play
up
really well. But I do feel, I'm like you, I feel like maybe they didn't get the attention they may have deserved.
Yeah, and then and the Gorillaz, I think were good too. Like the same guys, a couple of the same guys, and then like Arctic Monkeys had that Beatles.
I love the Arctic. Well, Arctic Monkeys can really play.
Yeah, they're like a punk rock version of the Beatles almost. You know, like punk rock, I guess, like by attitude, not necessarily sound, but they just remind me of the Beatles kind of like. And the Oasis had that potential too. They were just like a rip off of the Beatles almost. They're just like a '90s Beatles almost. Like I feel like, but I think there's so many bands that are so close, but they didn't have the longevity, didn't have the magic, and you might be right. The Beatles just stepped away and hide their fame, made them legends forever. That could have added a lot of value to it.
Now they also had, some historical and market conditions on their side. We had 3 networks at most, 3 channels, maybe 4 if you
True.
had independent stations back then.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like you had anything else to watch other than Sullivan on that Sunday night. There was no 24-hour sports. When you decided you loved something like that, and there's been nothing like that other than the Beatles, you could let them envelop your world. And of course, back in those days, the record company, in this case, EMI, was happy for them to have new output anytime they wanted. So there was a constant stimulation for new product. Whereas today, a group will take 3-5 years off, and sometimes by design, not to dilute the marketplace. And when you merge those 2 factors together, you can see how hard it is to build up momentum.
Yeah.
You get the idea. It's very difficult to build up that continuous momentum that you can then exploit and turn into a kind of global phenomenon.
That's definitely true. I'd say Radiohead almost has the same kind of popularity the Beatles do. Like for younger people, that's the only comparison I can have in recent generations. Like,
Radiohead's interesting because they're probably one of the closest artistic comparisons.
yeah, that's what
Yeah, and I saw them, a couple years ago when we used to go see concerts.
But that was the thing.
I'm
right?
a huge fan of Radiohead, and I think artistically, in terms of growth and the way they have developed artistically, they're pretty close to being a useful comparison. Are they perfect in terms of comparison? No. And they're certainly not a perfect comparison in terms of commercial success. But that
True,
artistic trajectory with Radiohead is...
It seems a lot like it. Yeah, no, it seems a lot like it. And I was lucky enough to find the Beatles in Reflection, so the entire catalog was already done. So I almost feel like I grew up with the Beatles in a way. Because when you're younger, you're more drawn to the one album or something, like all the songs on there, that kind of vibe, the early Beatles vibe. And as you get older, you get more into the White Album and stuff, and their later albums. I feel like that's why Sgt. Pepper, for example. I feel like you get more into I personally did anyway. I feel like I got more into the later Beatles.
The one album, how beautifully timed that was, and curated that project. To take that project and it was #1 in 36 countries, selling 40 million copies, but very well timed.
Yeah, that was crazy to think about. Well, are there some good links people should look at your books, or what book do you suggest somebody watching this or listening to this on streaming services to look up, of yours?
Wow. I check out the John Lennon 1980 book. We're sitting on this important anniversary. I think it's powerful to think about that last year, and it's an uplifting story. And I say this knowing very well that, John doesn't survive that year. But what's powerful about it is we all dream about being inspired and having, more success in our lives. It's something we do well. And it's a great story about a guy who gets himself up off the mat and says, I'm going to do this, and comes up with a spate of, world-breaking songs and makes it happen. And there were a lot of good reasons why he shouldn't even bother. But he does it anyway. And I find those kinds of stories to be really inspiring. And frankly, I think we need a lot of inspiration right now during these COVID days. A lot of people are hurting out there. And I see something inspiring in that, doing it anyway.
Yeah, I think that was the only book that came out in 2020. So if you read books and you miss books, this book came out last year and nothing else did.
That's right. There were no other books last year. It was a shame. It was a shame, but yeah, it was the only one they printed.
That's what I feel like, though. But check out Kenneth Womack's books. Google him. He comes up very easily. Look through his catalog. Find some books that interest you. Great writer. And thank you very much for taking the time to come on here, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
No problem.